Have you ever noticed how the same person can be viewed as a villain in one culture and a hero in another? That fascinating phenomena where identical words and actions create completely opposite reactions depending on who's listening and where they're from. I was analyzing Andrew Tate's reception across different regions, Western media coverage versus comment sections in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And something profound struck me. Despite the unified global internet, there exists an extraordinary divide in how his message resonates across cultural boundaries. This pattern fascinates me because Andrew Tate represents one of the most compelling examples of cultural mirroring in modern discourse. How one man's statement acts as a reflection point revealing the underlying values and assumptions of different societies. Today, we're exploring this cultural mirror effect, examining how Tate's global reception demonstrates the principle that controversial figures don't just express their own views, they function as projection screens for our cultural beliefs, fears, and aspirations. If you find value in these deeper perspectives, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your engagement helps this content reach others seeking to understand the science behind our shared experiences. How do controversial figures represent or reveal hidden cultural values? Andrew Tate doesn't just represent a polarizing internet personality. He embodies a fascinating case study in how cultural context determines message reception. His global impact reveals consistent patterns of cultural mirroring that challenge our understanding of universal values. Think of controversial figures like contrast dye in an MRI. They don't just express their own views, they illuminate the invisible boundaries and assumptions within different cultural systems. This isn't coincidental, it's a fundamental principle of cross-cultural communication that manifests whenever strong viewpoints cross borders. Remember when Tate's statement about gender roles created outrage in Western media, while simultaneously generating millions of supportive comments across Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East? These weren't random reactions, they were expressions of fundamental different cultural frameworks, interpreted identical content through distinct value systems. This cultural mirroring explains why his message resonates so differently across regions. He isn't being received differently through misunderstanding. He's being accurately interpreted through different cultural lenses. I've noticed the same quality with other polarizing figures, that characteristic split reaction that follows cultural rather than individual lines. The most fascinating aspect is that this divergence isn't arbitrary. It reveals the underlying values, hierarchies that silently shape perception within different societies. Some cultures prioritize individual autonomy and gender equality, while others emphasize traditional structures and clearly defined roles. Tate's statements act as a reagent, causing these normally invisible values to become suddenly visible through reaction. How does age influence perception across cultural boundaries? The central significance of Tate's reaction or reception isn't just geographic, but generational. This represents what psychologists call the value pendulum, the natural oscillation between progressive and traditional values that occurs across generational boundaries, regardless of location. Think of it like this. In social evolution, each generation naturally pushes against the dominant values of their parents, creating a predictable pattern of value shifts over time. Tate's message has emerged during a period when young men globally feel caught between competing value systems without clear guidance. Look at how his audience demographics reveal this pattern. His strongest support comes not just from specific regions, but from younger men across all regions who feel disconnected from both traditional masculine frameworks and modern progressive alternatives. These aren't random followers, they represent a predictable demographic responding to a specific cultural movement. I've observed how this same pattern creates the fascinating public reaction to his content. His appeal isn't just provocative statements. It represents the universal human experience of seeking identity frameworks during periods of rapid cultural change. When young men across vastly different cultures respond similarly to his message, they're not just reacting to his words, but to a shared experience of value uncertainty. The most revealing aspect is how his reaction divides along both cultural and generational lines simultaneously. This isn't just cultural difference, it's the intersection of geographic values and generational identity seeking. The same young men who resonates with Tate's message in Romania might find his twin in Michigan, both responding to similar experiences of masculine identity confusion despite their different cultural contexts. Why does the same content create different meanings across cultures? Andrew Tate's global reception reveals a fascinating principle about linguistic and cultural translation. This isn't just about language barriers, it's a fundamental principle of how identical words carry different implicit meanings within different cultural frameworks. Think of language like water, taking the shape of different cultural containers. The same words flow into pre-existing cultural frameworks and assume their shape. Tate's statements about discipline, responsibility, and gender dynamics don't just travel across borders. They're completely reinterpreted based on the receiving culture's underlying assumptions. Remember how his comments on male responsibility are often interpreted as misogyny in Western contexts, but as traditional values in Eastern European or Middle Eastern frameworks. This isn't misunderstanding, it's the natural transformation that occurs when identical content enters different cultural meaning systems. This explains why translation alone cannot bridge these perception gaps. It's not just the words being translated, but entire frameworks of meaning and value hierarchies. His statements, men should protect women, enters one cultural context as patriarchal control and another as basic social responsibility. Same words, completely different received meanings. I've noticed this same pattern with other cross-cultural communications. They often appear to create conflict, when in reality they're revealing pre-existing differences in fundamental assumptions. It's like two people using identical words with completely different dictionary definitions. They're wondering why they can't agree. The most profound insight here is that these cultural translations gaps aren't superficial misunderstandings, but windows into the deep structure of different cultural value systems. When we observed how different Tate's identical statements are received across cultures, we're actually seeing the normally invisible culture operating systems that process all information. How do media systems amplify different aspects of the same person? The most compelling aspect of Tate's cross-cultural reception is how different media ecosystems selectively amplify completely different aspects of his content. This isn't just bias, it reflects a universal principle about media systems naturally select content that reinforces existing cultural narratives. Think of media systems as cultural confirmation mechanisms. They naturally select and amplify the aspects of any figure that best confirm their audience's existing worldview. Western media consistently highlights Tate's most provocative statements about women, while Middle Eastern or Eastern European outlets emphasize his comments on discipline, responsibility, and traditional values. look at how selectively his content travels through different information ecosystems, it's not just random selection, but predictable amplification of the specific elements that generate maximum engagement within each cultural context. His statements on hard work and discipline dominate in regions with strong traditional values, while his gender commentary dominates in regions focused on gender equality. This creation of completely different versions of the same person isn't just media manipulation. It reflects how information naturally flows through cultural systems. The aspect of Tate that received attention in Saudi Arabia versus Sweden aren't randomly different. They're precisely the elements that create maximum resonance or outrage within each specific cultural context. I've observed how this pattern of selective amplification follows a consistent sequence across different controversial figures. The information ecosystem extracts exactly the elements that will generate maximum engagement within its specific cultural parameters. Tate's global reception represents this principle at its most visible, the transformation of one person into multiple cultures, avatars, each bearing little resemblance to the others. But the most powerful insight is recognizing that these different versions of Tate aren't fabrications, but selective amplifications. Each culture is responding to aspects that genuinely exist in his content, but prioritizing them differently based on their cultural significance hierarchies. This perspective transforms our understanding of media bias from simple manipulation to predictable cultural filtering. Andrew Tate's cross-cultural reception offers us much more than internet drama. It provides profound insights into how cultural frameworks shape perception, how generational values evolve, how language transforms across borders, and how media systems amplify different aspects of the same reality. The cultural mirror it represents reveals not just opinions about one man, but the underlying structures of how we all construct meaning. By understanding these dynamics, we gain not just appreciation for this specific case, but insight into all cross-cultural communication challenges. Each of us experience these same principles of cultural filtering, selective perception, and value projection in our daily lives. Sometimes creating profound misunderstanding, sometimes revealing important truths about our unexamined assumptions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this perspective. How have you noticed how differently certain figures or ideas are received across cultural boundaries? Or perhaps you've experienced how your own statements were interpreted in completely different when crossing cultural lines. Share your insights in the comments below. If this perspective resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Also hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time, remember that understanding different cultural perspectives doesn't require agreement, just a willingness to recognize that our own viewpoint is shaped by cultural framework as powerful as those who observe in others, or as powerful as those we observe in others. Stay curious, stay open, stay discerning, and stay conscious in the field.